I am a monarchist and an admirer of Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, and I think he will make an excellent king, and I very much look forward to him coming to the throne, and I hope he will use his reign to act like a real king, restoring some of the powers of the British Crown. These are not necessarily obvious or popular opinions, and in this video I want to explain my reasoning. First, I would like to say that I have not always been a monarchist. It's something I've come to in the last few years. Before that, I was vaguely a supporter of the royal family, like the average British person. And when I was much younger, I may have been a bit radical and fancied myself as a Republican. I can't really remember. In fact, at heart, I am really an anarchist. I don't like governments. I don't like laws and taxes. I would rather live without anyone telling me what to do and trying to control me. But I acknowledge that a complex, densely populated society could not exist without some form of government. I may dislike laws and taxes for myself, but when it comes to being attacked in the street or someone breaking into my house, I am glad there are laws and law enforcement agencies there to protect me, and I accept that those things have to be paid for. So government is a necessary evil, but if we can't have anarchy, then I favour monarchy as the next best thing. After all, anarchy, comes from Greek words that mean no rule, zero rule, while monarchy means one rule, the rule of one. And one is the next number up from zero. So if we can't have the rule of none, then the rule of one is as close as you can get. I'd rather have anarchy, zero rulers, but I'll settle for monarchy, one ruler. Because while we are on the subject of Greek derivations, let us remember the word democracy literally means mob rule. And for me, that is the thing I would like to avoid. If we look at history, we see that monarchy is a very ancient form of government that has persisted up to the present day and is found all around the world. There must be something quite benign and natural about it for it to have survived so well. And if we look at history, we also see that the biggest atrocities have been perpetrated by the so-called people's republics, by the societies that did away with monarchy as supposedly outdated and despotic. Places like Hitler's Germany, Stalin's Russia, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. None of these were monarchies. When the people rule, it seems we can end up with highly ideological, authoritarian and murderous regimes that make life miserable for everyone. Monarchies, on the other hand, bring normal people to the throne. These are not dictators with possibly psychopathic tendencies who have clawed their way to the top. They are people like you and me who happen to be there by an accident of birth, and whose lives and training have prepared them not to grab power, but to exercise it. Sometimes monarchs turn out to be social reformers. In Russia, it was the Tsar Alexander II who drove the liberation of the serfs against the wishes of many of the aristocracy and before the slaves were freed in America. Yes, there have been kings who were reactionary, authoritarian and downright cruel, and of course there are republics like the United States, France and Germany that are free, stable and prosperous. Nevertheless, it remains the case that monarchies are popular and persistent, and they have enjoyed a lot of affection and support over the years. People keep coming back to this form, and it clearly works. What is it about monarchy that makes it such a successful form of government? I would say it is the thing that people who dislike monarchy seem to hate about it the most, namely that it involves the hereditary principle. I see people calling the royals parasites and suggesting they are toffs with no feelings for ordinary people. But this is a false view of royal finances. They own property and businesses that bring them a lot of income, and they do not rely on state handouts. And in any case, only the most senior royals receive payments, which they more than earn through their work for the UK. So you are not funding their lifestyle, forget that. As for them being toffs, you could only say that if you have never met them. I think a lot of opposition to the royals is because it seems unfair that they should get all this privilege and luxury just by a quirk of fate, when the rest of us have to struggle and work for our living. But look, the country has to be governed by someone, and even if you abolished the royals, that wouldn't really make it any likelier that you and I would become Prime Minister or President. It's perhaps psychologically reassuring to think that in principle you could become the ruler, but it makes little practical difference. You could say, but when we vote for our rulers, at least we can change them if we don't like them. At least they need to take account of our wishes if they want to get elected. Well, it sounds right, but I do wonder if anti-royalists ever stop for a moment to look at actual politicians. I don't wish to take any particular political point of view. I'm talking about politicians in general. Are these really people we respect and admire and love having rule over us because of the wonderful job they are doing? Are they really so much more desirable than, say, the Queen? Perhaps many are decent and sincere, but according to opinion polls, politicians remain the least trusted profession in Britain. And I think the existing system is the problem. It attracts the wrong sort of people. So why do I think a hereditary monarchy is better? Well, let me count the ways. First, there is the fact that for hereditary monarchs, the country is their country. They own it. They want to pass it on to their heirs as a going concern. Of course, they want that country and its population to flourish and do well. We all know that we look after our own things better than people who borrow them from us do. Kings and queens want the best for what is, in effect, their property. But elected politicians only come and go. They are concerned more with their careers. Sure, they may be trying to do a good job, but it's a lot more about them, and they just don't have the same stake in the situation that a hereditary ruler does. Hereditary rulers really have the interests of their country at heart. But elected politicians, not so much. Second, there is the fact that hereditary monarchs know at some level that they are only there by an accident of birth, and this gives them a sense of service. Elected politicians know they have got where they are through their own efforts, through their own brilliance, if you like. As a result, elected politicians are more likely to look down on ordinary people, thinking, well, you didn't try hard like I did, and you have only got what you deserved. To be fair, I have found MPs to be caring and helpful to their constituents. Nevertheless, it's only natural if they see their achievements as their own and feel they don't owe anything to people who didn't get as far. But hereditary royals can't think that way. They know it's all a matter of luck, and they are that bit more likely to feel some kind of obligation to the less fortunate and to use their power and privilege to help others. Third, hereditary rule tends to promote a kind of social stability, which makes life more peaceful and more prosperous, if perhaps less interesting. You don't have new waves of politicians coming along every few years, putting their own people into power and trying to make their mark by changing everything. Instead, the rulership passes down through the family, and there are no dramatic shifts of power. More of a process of progressive refinement. With electoral politics, you tend to lurch from one extreme to the other, each one being flawed in its own way, and society as a whole is divided into competing factions working against each other most of the time. That's not good for really solving difficult problems, and it's not good for providing the certainty that allows people to make rational plans. Fourth, which is connected to this, is that hereditary monarchs can take a long-term view and engage in long-term projects. It's well known that farmers who own their land do things that are investments for the future, like planting trees, say, whereas renters don't, because they won't be around to enjoy the benefits. Similarly, a royal dynasty that is passing things on to its children and grandchildren can do things that take time to pay off, whereas rapidly changing governments are likely to go for quick results and do things that win them votes in the here and now, while later generations will pay the price. The fifth point kind of follows on from some of the other points, and it is that a royal dynasty works its way into the society that it rules. Because of its stability and long-termism, it can lay down deep roots, and this means that the royal dynasty comes to understand and reflect the society. It helps bind the society together and becomes part of its identity. And, just as importantly, it knows what is going on in the society. So social mobility can be very high in a hereditary monarchy. Talent is still in demand and tends to come to the attention of the royal officials, and it's more likely to be genuine talent rather than just the talent to climb the slippery pole. Sixth, monarchs are not so prone to corruption. As we know, many political scandals involve some kind of corruption, but when you're the king, there aren't many bribes that would tempt you, not only because you already have all the power and wealth you could want, but also because you have no reason to act against the interest of society. As I explained earlier, the interests of the society and the interests of the dynasty are one and the same. Seventh is the fact that, paradoxically, hereditary monarchs are more like the ordinary person than elected politicians are. In a democracy where rising to the top is a struggle against intense competition, there are not many people who are going to make it. They have to have strong political skills and a strong desire for power. This represents a rather narrow range of personality types. But people who inherit power are not self-selected in this way. They may be any kind of personality. What's more, they have not had to please anyone in order to get where they are, and so they have more freedom to express their true opinions. Similarly, the hereditary peers were abolished from the House of Lords, supposedly to make it more democratic. But the old hereditary peers actually thought more like the general public than the new peers, who are ex-politicians, top business people, and others who have been very successful in their careers, not at all typical of the average person. Eighth, and this is enough points, there is the mystique of royalty. They are above day-to-day politics, and it tends to mean a lot to people to receive a royal visit and royal condolences or royal congratulations. True, people can also be in awe of politicians and other celebrities, but you only need to look at royal walkabouts to see the special place they have in people's hearts. So those are some arguments for hereditary rule, and that doesn't mean arbitrary or despotic rule. Hereditary monarchs can still consult their subjects and take advice, and that is a system that has grown up in the UK over the last 1,000 years and generally served the nation well, with one or two hiccups. Now, the thing is that the monarchy in the UK has lost more and more of its powers over recent centuries, especially in the last 100 years or so. To most people, perhaps, it seems largely decorative, good for pageantry and tourism, but really just a living tradition. They don't see the crown as having a meaningful say in running the country. And while that is largely true, it's not entirely true. The crown still has important powers, even though it chooses to exercise them only in accordance with public wishes. The Prime Minister still has to report weekly to the Queen, and the Queen is always mixing with senior politicians, foreign heads of state, diplomats and other important people, while being senior to most of them. Her opinion, that is, the Queen's opinion, may exert more influence than we ordinary folk are aware of. And thank goodness for that, because Her Majesty has been a lot of places and seen a lot of things in her 90+ years, and I imagine she has a good deal of wisdom and good advice to impart. Nevertheless, it is clear that in formal terms the British monarchy has little control over the government of this country, and may often have to grin and bear it as it sees what is still called Her Majesty's government doing things it does not really approve of. But history doesn't run in only one direction. Quite the opposite. It often goes into reverse. Empires rise and then they fall. Britain joined the European community, then it chose to leave. In many countries, including Britain, monarchies have been overthrown and later restored. The British Crown may have seen its power greatly eroded, but the time is ripe for it to be restored. The whole system of representative democracy is becoming discredited. Many people don't trust politicians, and they are put off by scandals and failures. It doesn't look as though politicians really care about ordinary people or listen to their concerns. They seem weak or hypocritical. People say politicians are all the same and voting doesn't change anything. The pundits say this is why anti-establishment figures and so-called populist parties are on the rise around the world. People are fed up with the existing system. They want a change. They want someone to take charge, someone they can believe in. And particularly, they want that someone to sweep out the self-serving political class, get rid of all the people who are milking the system, and start making it work for the ordinary person, listening to the views of the person in the street. That is the mood, and, as the pundits say, it is dangerous because it can be hijacked by people who present themselves as the saviours of the ordinary people, when in fact they are megalomaniacs who are likely to lead their country into disaster. But where there is danger, there is opportunity, and in this case there is the opportunity for the British monarchy, which has a head start on anyone else, to show real leadership and take us back to a form of genuine kingship, executive kingship, where the ruler actually rules. And again, the point is, this doesn't mean a return to absolutism and tyranny. Not at all. In fact, completely the opposite. This is also a great opportunity for the people to be given a more direct say in how the country is run. Why do we have Parliament? It is partly because over the centuries the people have forced monarchs to listen to their subjects, and partly because monarchs want advice and want to know what the people are thinking. Parliament literally means a place for talking, and that's what it is, a place for people to air their views and discuss the important issues facing the country and come to some decisions about them. Not just for the sake of it, but so that these can be heard by the monarch and shape the monarch's policies and way of governing. And this is not just a matter of fairness. There is the so-called wisdom of crowds, that many heads are better than one. So it makes perfect sense for the monarch to take advice from the people, the more the better. So that is what Parliament is, a way for the people to communicate with the monarchy. But we don't need to choose a representative every 5 years, then send them up to London to speak on our behalf in a debating chamber. That is the approach that grew up in days of old, when people could only travel around by horse and cart, and there were no telephones or anything like that. In those days, the only feasible way to have a discussion was for a relatively small number of people to come together physically in the same room. But that doesn't apply in a world where we have Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. Now everyone can have a voice, and the monarch can listen to the people directly. So we don't need a parliamentary building anymore. We don't need periodic elections. And most importantly, we don't need elected representatives. We don't need professional politicians. The trouble with having professional politicians, as I said before, is that it attracts the wrong sort of people. And it's all about them and their career, not acting like the mouthpiece they are supposed to be. And it leads to the formation of political parties, which become the focus of people's loyalty and turn the whole thing into a point-scoring contest. So this is what I'm proposing, that with a new reign there is the opportunity to sweep away the current system of professional politics and replace it with a new kind of parliament, updated to the 21st century and based on internet technologies, in which the monarch listens to the people directly, perhaps putting forward issues for discussion, monitoring what people say, and getting a feel for public opinion. This will give ordinary people a genuine say in what is going on, much better than just putting an X on a ballot paper every few years. And why the next reign will be a particularly good opportunity for this is because I think the present Prince of Wales will make an excellent king. If that seems unlikely, it is because we have been fed a view of him as stuffy, stuck up and a bit loony with crackpot theories, a view that is biased and completely wrong. We all know that what the media tell us is not necessarily the objective truth, and there is spin and distortion. Well, that is how it is for the Prince of Wales. The problem is that he has long been challenging conventional wisdom, and as the experts have got upset by this, they have implied he doesn't know what he's talking about. Whereas, in fact, he's turned out to have been pretty much correct all along. For example, he pointed out environmental problems like plastic pollution long before professional politicians began to take them seriously. A little while ago, the question of who would succeed the Queen as head of the Commonwealth came up, and it was pointed out that the position is not hereditary, so there was no reason why it should go to Prince Charles. In the end, he was chosen. Nevertheless, one MP said she didn't think it should go to Charles because, so she said, he hasn't done much lately. Well, Prince Charles does a lot for people every day. Let me give one example. Many villages in Britain are losing essential services like the post office and village shop, as people can easily go to the town and it's no longer economically viable to maintain those services in the village. But while it's not economically viable for the shops, it does mean a loss for the community. Well, Prince Charles came up with a solution, dubbed "The Pub is the Hub," where the village pub also becomes the post office, the shop, the dry cleaners and what have you. It helps the pub and it helps the community retain these services. And Prince Charles has visited some of these pubs to see what they are doing and encourage them, and it no doubt means a lot to those concerned that he should take an interest. This is what Prince Charles is doing. It is just it doesn't get talked about much. He is helping real people solve real problems in a practical way. His focus is on the people, his country, not his career. And this is just one small example. To give one more, he got together with various British Asian business leaders to form the British Asian Trust, which does charitable work in India, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. To give another, his Prince's Trust helps fund young entrepreneurs. The designer Oswald Boateng got his start in this way. So let's be clear that no one beside the Queen understands Britain and its inhabitants better than the present Prince of Wales. For a start, he has spent a lifetime touring the country, meeting people from all walks of life, visiting factories, schools, hospitals, community projects, sports teams, local government offices, etc., etc., etc. He has met with vast numbers of politicians and diplomats while visiting practically every country in the world. He keeps an eye on national and local government, getting involved to promote causes from environmentalism to the preservation of ancient buildings, and he has a well-known interest in architecture and planning. He has visited the sites and victims of various disasters, learning what went wrong and comforting those affected. He is no stranger to tragedy and misfortune in his own life, for example, losing his great-uncle Earl Mountbatten to an IRA attack. He is a farmer and runs his own businesses from which he draws his income, as well as helping and encouraging young entrepreneurs. He has served in the armed forces. He is involved with the arts and has himself published books and exhibited paintings. He is a sportsman. He is a father and grandfather. And that is by no means a complete list. No one can say this is someone who is out of touch and doesn't know what he is talking about. He knows the geography, economics, politics and culture of Britain, and to some extent of the world, better than any of his critics. He knows what the country is made from and what it is capable of, and he has personal interests in many parts of it. Surely this is someone who is fantastically well qualified to be the country's head of state, and not just as a figurehead, but with real responsibility and influence. Because not only is the Prince of Wales extremely knowledgeable, and no one could realistically deny that, but he has also shown himself to have a great deal of wisdom. Let's wind back a bit. In the old days, trees grew in mixed forests, and foresters would walk through the forest, marking the trees that were ready for harvesting. These would be cut down and dragged out of the forest through all the trees that were still standing. Then in the 19th century, scientific forestry came along. Now people would plant a whole forest of trees in one go, all in neat parallel lines, and they would be just a single type of tree. This meant that the trees would all be ready at the same time, and all the foresters would have to do was go down the line, felling them one by one. Much more efficient than the old way. And at first these artificial forests did very well, but after a while the productivity started to fall off. It became clear that they were taking all the goodness out of the soil and not putting anything back. What's more, they were susceptible to parasites and diseases. In the old style of forest, an oak tree might get infected, say, but the next oak tree would be some distance away with various other kinds of tree in between. This made it difficult for diseases to spread. But when there was just one type of tree all in a nice row, diseases could spread like wildfire. Foresters solved this not by going back to the old method, but by applying fertilizer to replenish the soil and pesticides to combat disease. Masses of chemicals, in other words. And this kind of scientific approach was adopted not just in forestry, but in all kinds of farming, involving masses of chemicals and using up resources in an unsustainable way. Well, the Prince of Wales was one of those speaking out against this approach from a long time ago. And of course he was told by the experts that he didn't understand and his ideas were naive and unworkable. But he didn't just waffle on about it. He put his money where his mouth was and adopted organic farming principles on his own estates to prove that this other way of doing things could be a success. And it has been a success. Duchy Originals, the brand he set up to market organic products, is now an international company worth hundreds of millions of pounds, and the profits go to charity. And although there may still be a long way to go, more and more people have been coming round to his ideas. And this is not just a romantic fondness for traditional ways of doing things, nor is it just about the specific issue of agriculture. There is a deeper point here, which is what the Prince of Wales has really been trying to get across. This is that nature, and society too, are complex systems, and they need to be treated as such. If you go simplifying them down with simplified notions of how they behave, you are likely to lose a lot of vital aspects that you didn't realise were important, and the system may react very differently from what you expected, or collapse entirely. You wouldn't go poking about in your computer, throwing away bits that don't seem to be doing very much. Why do you think you can do that to an ecosystem and get away with it? The thing about traditional practices is not that they are traditional, but that they have evolved through experience and reflect a lot of accumulated wisdom. This doesn't mean you can't go on improving them, but you need to respect the complexity and find ways to work with the complexity. And of course, the whole discipline of complexity science has grown up and become an important field of inquiry over the last few decades, and is in a way reaffirming what the Prince of Wales has been saying since long before it became fashionable. And the same point is what motivates the Prince's views on architecture. In the 20th century, people began looking at cities the same way they had looked at forests, as messy and inefficient. And this led to scientific architecture and the construction of cities with houses in one district, shops in another district, offices in another district, industry in another district, and so on. Much neater and seemingly more efficient. But it soon became clear that these cities were not only soulless, but didn't work. There are good reasons why shops and offices and residential dwellings are usually mixed up in a city. It creates a more vibrant neighbourhood, letting people pop out for a sandwich or a bottle of milk, and ensuring that there are people around at most hours of the day and night, making it safer too. Scientific architecture also led to massive tower blocks and uniform estates with vast amounts of concrete, which soon decayed and became associated with social problems, so that they are now being knocked down again. The Prince of Wales pointed out these issues long ago, and again he was regarded as interfering in things he knew nothing about, though today, with the benefit of hindsight, few people would doubt the accuracy of his criticisms. And again, he didn't just lecture about it, he put his money where his mouth was and built a new town, Poundbury in Dorset, to show that another way really was possible. And the bottom line remains that the more time has gone on, the more people have come round to his way of thinking. So the Prince of Wales has long been swimming against the tide, and as a result, the mainstream cognoscenti have looked down on him and trivialised his opinions as the amateurish musings of a man with a few bees in his bonnet, who has to be humoured because he is a member of royalty, but in no way taken seriously. But these are not bees in the bonnet. They are aspects of a very consistent and well thought out philosophy, which is winning the argument as fads give way to facts. And this philosophy emphasises acknowledging and respecting the complexity of things like cities and ecosystems, and it emphasises listening to ordinary people and thinking about their needs, helping them in the way they would like to be helped, not imposing from on high the grand vision of some supposed genius. And last but not least, it's a philosophy that embraces experimentation and practical results, not theoretical purity. So I repeat, I think the present Prince of Wales will make an excellent king, bringing knowledge, wisdom and experience at serving the country and helping its people that no other person could begin to match, bar none. And, I repeat, I hope that he will actually rule this country as a real king with real power, and with his most important act being to bring the concept of Parliament up to date, i.e. talking directly to the people with the benefit of modern technology. We don't need the Houses of Parliament. We don't need elections. We don't need professional politicians. Now, this raises some important questions, such as how debates and votes would work in this new kind of mass parliament, and whether we would need a second chamber as today we have the House of Lords, and where government ministers would come from, given that today they are appointed by the professional politicians from among themselves. But that is all detail. I think there are some straightforward solutions, but it's not my business to say what they should be. It's the sort of thing that would need to be worked out via some kind of consultation. Let me finish by saying that this idea of direct communication between monarch and people is the way to the best and freest kind of society. In general, societies can be thought of as being divided into three centres of power. The one, i.e. the ruler, the monarch in this case. The few, i.e. the elite, such as politicians and the rich and powerful. And the many, the masses, the common people. Ideally, all three are on the same side, but if they are not, any two can dominate the third. If the one is aligned with the few, they can keep down the many. If the few are aligned with the many, they can overthrow the one, and that is how revolutions occur. Finally, if the one is aligned with the many, they can keep the few under control. And from the perspective of the ordinary person, that is the best arrangement. Because the one cares about the whole society, and the whole society basically is the many. But the few, they have narrower interests than the one, although they still have a lot of power to distort things in their own favour, in ways that benefit them personally while possibly harming the society as a whole. Now, the existing forms of government, which are based on an assumption of restricted communications, tend to favour the few because the few have to channel communications between the many and the one. What I've suggested is to use the internet to short-circuit this and allow the one and the many to work together in a kind of alliance, if necessary, against the few. Then, with a wise monarch and a solid one-to-many alliance, you have the recipe for a golden age. So that is why I currently consider myself a monarchist and a supporter of the Prince of Wales.